Today, we're diving into the incredible story of Lucius Amerson. Now, his victory at the ballot box back in 1966, that wasn't the finish line. It was actually just the beginning of this unbelievable 20-year struggle for justice and authority right in the heart of the Deep South.
So get this, on the very night he made history, Lucius Amerson said these words, "I had to run 3 times and beat 5 men." You know, that quote just perfectly captures the unbelievable grit it took to shatter a barrier that had stood for almost 100 years.
And man, what a fight it was. I mean, winning that election was absolutely monumental. But as you're about to see, it just kicked off a whole new battle against the establishment, against institutional resistance, and just straight-up sabotage. Securing the office, that was one thing. But being allowed to actually run it, well, that was a different story entirely.
Okay, so to really get a grip on Amerson's victory, first we have to understand where it happened: Macon County, Alabama. This place was basically a political powder keg, just waiting for a spark. The pressure was building, and things were about to change big time. Just look at these numbers. They tell you everything you need to know. The population of Macon County was overwhelmingly black. We're talking 84%. But before 1965, thanks to things like poll taxes, literacy tests, and pure intimidation, less than 10% of black citizens were even registered to vote. It was a democracy in name only.
And gerrymandering was one of the most powerful tools they used. In 1957, the Alabama legislature literally redrew the map of Tuskegee into this bizarre 28-sided shape. Why? Just to cut black voters out of the city limits. I mean, can you even picture that? It was so outrageous it went all the way to the Supreme Court, in a case called Gomillion versus Lightfoot, which thankfully declared it unconstitutional.
And that brings us to the real game changer, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This thing was a political earthquake. For the first time, federal law was there to protect the right to vote. And the numbers in Macon County, well, they just flipped, practically overnight. The black majority finally had a voting majority. The stage was officially set for a new kind of candidate.
So this new political reality is what made Amerson's campaign possible. But listen, he didn't just win one election. No, he had to fight his way through this grueling 3-round contest to finally claim the sheriff's office.
Okay, round 1, the Democratic primary. Amerson comes out on top, even beating the incumbent Sheriff Harvey Sadler. But because he didn't get over 50% of the vote, the rules said he had to go into a head-to-head runoff. The fight was far from over.
So in the runoff at the end of May, Amerson sealed the deal. He beat Sadler with almost 53% of the vote, and he won the Democratic nomination. Now, in a county like this, which was totally dominated by Democrats, that should have been the end of the story. But of course, it wasn't.
And here we go, the final round. The incumbent, Sadler, refused to accept his loss, so he launched this massive write-in campaign for the general election. But the newly empowered voters of Macon County, they had the final say. Amerson won with over 64% of the vote. He had really, truly run 3 times and won.
So Amerson had won the election, everything's good, right? Not even close. The moment he actually took power, that's where the story takes a really dramatic and kind of chilling turn. His very first day in office became a symbol of just how much resistance he was up against.
How many deputies were left on his first day? 0. On January 16, 1967, Lucius Amerson walks into his new office, and every single one of his white deputies had resigned in protest. He was now the sheriff of a 611-square-mile county with absolutely no staff.
Amerson's own explanation was as simple as it was profound. They wouldn't work with me. This mass resignation, it was a calculated move. It was designed to make his job impossible from the first minute of the first day. The message was loud and clear. A black man might win an election, but he wasn't going to be allowed to govern. And it wasn't just the deputies. The whole system seemed to be working against him. They held his swearing-in ceremony in private, not in public. Officials tried to strip his office of funding by creating a whole new constable position. Judges and prosecutors just refused to cooperate. They were trying to do everything they could to prove that a black sheriff couldn't be effective.
But here's the thing. Amerson proved them all wrong. He didn't just survive this, he thrived. But his entire 2-decade tenure felt like he was constantly on trial, fighting battles not just on the streets of Macon County, but in courtrooms and in federal offices too.
I mean, just look at this timeline.
It really speaks for itself. He beat Sadler again in 1970, and then he went on to win a third term, a fourth, and a fifth, a total of 5 consecutive terms, serving for 20 years. He built a political coalition that lasted and completely changed law enforcement in that county.
But that success definitely came at a price. All through his time in office, Amerson was hit with what many saw as politically motivated harassment. We're talking a constant barrage of FBI inquiries, IRS audits, and even a federal indictment, which, by the way, he was fully acquitted of. This was all part of a larger pattern of using federal power to try and undermine newly elected black officials across the South.
Towards the end of his career, one of these legal fights escalated into a landmark case that went all the way to the Alabama Supreme Court. This was a battle that would end up defining the power and authority of every single sheriff in the entire state.
And it all came down to this one simple but absolutely critical question. Is a county sheriff a state employee or a county employee? The answer would determine who a sheriff answers to and who's responsible for their actions. It was a huge constitutional showdown.
Okay, let's break this down because it's super important. On one hand, if a sheriff is a state employee, they're part of the state's executive branch. That means they're protected by something called sovereign immunity, and they're accountable to the governor. On the other hand, if they're a county employee, then the county can be sued for what they do, and they're held accountable by local courts. See the difference? In the end, the court's decision was a huge victory for Amerson and for sheriffs all across Alabama. The ruling basically said, yep, sheriffs are executive officers of the state. This gave them a powerful layer of legal protection and cemented the idea that their authority comes from the state, not just the county they serve.
So after 20 years of struggle, of success, of all these trials, what is Lucius Amerson's ultimate legacy? Well, it's one of profound change, for sure. But it's also a legacy that sometimes gets a little misunderstood.
Okay, so there's one thing we need to clear up. If you look online, you'll sometimes see Sheriff Amerson get confused with a Sheriff Frank Anderson from Indiana, but they were two different trailblazers from two totally different eras. Amerson's historic election was in Alabama, back in 1966. Anderson's was in Indiana, more than 35 years later. Both are incredibly important figures, but their stories are separate.
You know, when you really look at it, Amerson's story is such a powerful lesson. It shows that the ballot box can open the door to power, but there are always going to be powerful forces trying to slam that door shut. His 20-year fight proves that winning an election, that's just step one. The real fight is holding on to that power and actually using it to make a lasting change. And that kind of leaves us with a big question for today. What does his fight teach us about what it takes to protect political power right now?